Welcome to the Freethinkers Living Sober Group's workshop on varieties of secular experience, navigating AA in a secular way. Today, we are pleased to welcome a panel of speakers who are going to be talking about the diversity of recovery in secular AA. Before we do that, I want to make a couple of announcements. As usual, our last Sunday of the month, we have a different speaker or panel of speakers sharing their experience for 30 or 45 minutes total. And how they've stayed sober or got sober in AA in a secular way. These workshops are recorded, and we post the audio on our Freethinkers Living Sober Buzzsprout page. We'll put that in the chat, the link. Our past workshops are on the YouTube channel. Slowly, I'll try and update the Buzz link. You can check the chat for the links. But in October, we're not going to have our workshop because the International Conference of Secular AA, affectionately known as ICSA, will be on the 29th and 30th. It's going to be a great conference and you're all invited to attend. So to check out when we get it updated on aasecular.org for the details, we'll give you the details as they come out. I want to thank Kat for organizing and providing the chat tech support and co-hosting stuff, and Joe as well. You can also check the chat because we'll put some links to free pamphlets, online pamphlets from AA.org, secular resources, books, podcasts, that kind of stuff. I haven't asked anybody yet. Can I have a volunteer to read for us the introductory reading? Anybody?
I can do that, John.
Okay, great. Thanks. Let me get it on the screen here and
hey, family. Sorry, 1 second. In AA, we are supposed to be bound together in the kinship of universal suffering. Therefore, the full liberty to practice any creed or principle or therapy should be a first consideration. Hence, let us not pressure anyone with individual or even collective views. Let us instead accord to each other the respect that is due to every human being as he tries to make his way towards the light. Let us always try to be inclusive rather than exclusive. Let us remember that each alcoholic among us is a member of AA, so long as he or she so declares, from Bill Wilson's 1965 address to the General Service Conference. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. As freethinkers, we aspire to open-mindedness and to appreciating the sharing of others, particularly those with whom we disagree. So we ask only that everyone share without attempting to dissuade, argue, or disrespect anyone else or their beliefs. As a group, we are secular. That is, we do not endorse or oppose any system of belief. We don't have any quarrel with any form of religion, and we also don't use prayers of any kind in our workshops or our meetings. Our only wish is to assure suffering alcoholics that they can find sobriety in AA without having to accept anyone else's belief or having to deny their own. By the way, during the workshop, the chat function will only be available to send tests to the hosts. If you have a question or a problem about the workshop or the panelists, you can send them to them too. After the panel, we'll have raised hand function so that you can call on people in the order that you raise your hand. And we'll have open Q&A for about an hour, depends on how long our speakers speak. We ask that you keep your microphone muted at that time unless it's your turn to share. And our guest panelists this month are going to speak on their experience in AA, in secular AA, with a focus on 3 different areas of diversity of recovery. Yuichi will be talking about phenomenology. Zanner is going to speak about mental health issues, and Harry will discuss NeuroDivergence and recovery. And thank you for being here, you guys. Zanner, it's all yours.
Hey, thanks, John. Hi, everyone. Zanner. It's good to be here. John, thank you for asking me. He asked me to share, I don't know, maybe a month ago or something like that. And then he messaged me and he's just like, okay, go get speakers and give us like a panel and all this. And I was just like, oh my God. But it's good. It's good to be here. I'm really nervous very, very anxious person. I'll just get into discussing that later. But we'll start off with Yuichi. When I was thinking about diversity in recovery, I was thinking about how different life is for all of us when we get sober, and how it's a really unique experience in our struggles and aspirations and our successes, more so than just, whether it's more so than how we work the steps in regards to our spirituality, if it's like secular or God-based and all that kind of stuff, right? So I thought of the speakers that I asked today. I find have a really a very unique way of the way that their recovery has transpired, and I just thought it would be really great to hear what they offer to share. So with that, Yuichi, if you want to come in and start sharing first.
Hi, wait, I'm Yuichi, alcoholic, addict, whatever. Thank you, Zanner. I thought you were going first. So I was like, okay, good. I get some time to just sort of relax. So am I supposed to go for about 20 minutes, or should I go shorter or longer?
20 minutes is fine, or if you go longer, then you go longer.
Okay, I'll shoot for 20 minutes. I have a stopwatch on me. I want to thank Zanner for asking me. I'm sure that gratitude will grow as this continues. It wasn't there 10 minutes ago. She asked me to talk about phenomenology. I've never actually talked about it at a meeting. I've mentioned it, but I don't think I've ever talked about it. And I'm trained in that. Let's see. So I've been sober, clean and sober since February of 1989. And I've actually never declared a home group. And I sent Joe a text last night where I don't know if you read it. I said, I have many, many sponsors, but none of them know that they sponsor me. I told him, you might be sponsoring me, but I can't tell you if you are. But I've actually never spoken with him on the phone, but he could still be my sponsor, or one of my many, many sponsors. So anyway, that's just my little facetious way of sort of mocking the usual. I don't mean to mock it. Well, I guess I am. But I'm just being honest. That's honestly my program. So I'll just, look, I've taught a graduate level course on phenomenology, but I don't want to do that here. But I'll just mention, in case there's anyone who hasn't spent time on Google, I'm off to read that chat by Joe later, on phenomenology. So I think there are different ways to define it, but I think the most general definition is that it's the examination of experience. And to be a little more specific, the examination of lived experience. And if you've never come across the word lived experience, I think maybe that's just a fancy way of saying experience as it's lived. So it's not conceptualizing experience. It's not putting theories on experience, but it's examining one's own experience. Not through the filter of concepts. So if I were to expand the definition, it might be the examination of lived experience as reflected in consciousness. So one can examine one's own experience as it's reflected in our own consciousness. And we can also talk to people. For example, if I want to explore the phenomena of anger, I will try to get myself angry. And then once the anger starts, I'll start paying attention to the entirety of the experience. And then I will go talk to people and ask them to tell me their stories of anger. And as they're talking about it, I'll ask them to describe what's it like to feel angry. What does it feel like in your body? What kinds of thoughts do you have? What other feelings accompany it? And the job of a phenomenologist is then to sort of try to map out the structure of a phenomenon. So an even fuller definition of phenomenology might be the examination and study of the structure of lived experience as reflected in consciousness. And so that seems the simple part. I guess the harder part, and I thought about this a bit, was how has this related to my recovery? I think for me, one of the most important things is that I was sober for about 13, 14 years before I was exposed to phenomenology. And when I came across it, it spoke to me. And since then, I've sort of been a practitioner of it. Heidegger referred to phenomenology as a methodology. I would call it an attitude toward living. And it spoke to me because it felt like a way to form beliefs or ideas based on examination of experience, not based on authority, not based on simply logic, not based on superstition, not based on tradition, not based on, what 100 out of 100 people happen to say, not based on my feelings, not based on my attachments, not based on my preferences, but to the best of my ability through as careful examination of my lived experience as possible and trying to form conclusions from it. I'll just give an example. Before this meeting started, Joe made a comment. I think he said something like, we don't sing because we're happy, but we're happy because we sing. Or something like that. Maybe he said it in a funnier way. Okay. So that made me think of something that we all know, which is the Serenity Prayer. And when I think of the Serenity Prayer, I think if I put myself in the person who wrote the Serenity Prayer, I think, okay, this is a person who has, for example, the first line, who has experienced the ability to accept things as they are at times in his life. And no doubt, we've all experienced that. I've experienced that, where it's like, things roll off like a duck's back. And so I seem to be serene. So I seem to be able to accept things. So then I think it's natural to form a conclusion that serenity supports the ability to accept things as they are. So therefore, it makes sense to beseech some being or higher power, all powerful thing, somebody, let me have some serenity. But when I examine my experience, that doesn't jive with my experience. My experience is that when I accept things as they are, I get serenity. So in other words, I'm probably not the first person to say this, but to me, the Serenity Prayer is backwards, according to how I've examined my experience. I don't need serenity to accept things as they are. I can just accept things as they are, and I get serenity. If I don't accept things as they are, there's no chance for me to have serenity, and praying for the rest of my life, I don't think will generate serenity. Same with courage. When I was new, my very first meeting, and it was my weekly meeting, was a podium meeting. And I was very introverted and very scared. And I could barely open my mouth in front of 3 people. The idea of going in front of a podium in front of 40 people, 50 people, actually it was around 70 or 80, was just completely frightening. But I'd been going to this meeting for about 2 or 3 months, and I had never opened my mouth there. But I don't know if you've done that when you're new, where you're going to meetings, brand new, and you're not participating. I think there came a point for me where I just felt inside like I need to find a way to participate. And I had a sponsor though. So I went up to and I thought, my sponsor has magical, so this sponsor happened to know that he was my sponsor. Then I was a little more obedient and a little more straightforward, sincere, and not so perverse. But like most of the people here, no, I just anyway, no, just me. I'm just talking about myself. But so So he was my sponsor, and I thought this guy, and I had this thought that like he's my sponsor, he has magical powers over me. So he knows what words to say to me to imbue me with courage so I can participate at the meeting. So before the meeting started, I go up to him and I say, David, I've been coming here for a couple of months and I know I need to share. So what do you think? And I'm expecting him to say something to me. Instead, he just walks away, walks up to the secretary who's standing at the podium, and then points back at me and says, pick on that guy. So the secretary comes and says, hey, I want you to read the 12 traditions. And I'm like, what the fuck? Like, you haven't imbued me with any courage, and now you've put me in a position that I can't do. Well, but I had to do it because now I had the reading. So I went up there, my voice quivering. It was one of the hardest things I remember doing, but I did it. And I kept doing things like that to where now here I'm able to talk for 20 minutes. I eventually became a teacher, a professor, where I could talk in front of even hundreds of people. And so what I understand is courage comes from taking actions that require me to walk through my fear. I don't need courage beforehand. I don't need confidence beforehand. But if I take the action, courage comes, confidence comes to taking. Confidence and conviction comes as a result. And so again, for me, that second line of the serenity prayer is, for me, it's backwards to the phenomena, how things are structured, at least as I have examined them. And same with the third phrase, right? I don't need wisdom from God, or I don't need wisdom to know the difference. What I find is I just have to practice discernment to the best of my ability over and over and over and over. Make a bunch of pro-con lists, talk things out with people, and practice discernment. Practice discerning between things I can change and things I can't. And as I do that, I accumulate the wisdom to know. And so just like Joe's comment, for me, the serenity, Joe's comment about singing, I think of the serenity prayer as essentially a backwards prayer and sort of relegates God to irrelevance. That's not meant to be an offensive comment, but so by the way, I don't identify as an atheist nor agnostic. I'm someone who, if someone were to press me, I would say, yeah, I believe in something, but I don't think that belief matters. It doesn't seem to play a big part in what matters in my life. So for example, I'm a writer and I've written a lot and a lot of things. And one of the things that I know about writing, or I don't know if I should say I know, but so far the evidence seems to be supportive of this view, which is that what I believe has almost no bearing on whether I write or whether writing happens. So like kind of similar to writing or meditation. So I've been a daily meditator for about 25 years. And I could say the same thing about my recovery, but I'll just speak about writing right now, is that when I was working on that first book, almost every morning when I would show up to my computer, I had two thoughts. Or actually, I'll just share the first thought, which was, I can't do this. Or it was, this is impossible. I had that thought every single morning when I sat down to work on my dissertation. But I just showed up, and then miraculously, a couple hours later, I would have like a paragraph, or I would have some notes. And I did this every day for about 2 years, and I had my dissertation. And that's what I've learned. And so, and I've continued writing. Well, actually, I stopped about 2 months ago, but that's because of COVID, I think. For me, COVID is just like a great blessing that helps me to get over this disease called writing. But I know Joe probably suffers from it. It's one of these happiness drugs, but thank God I've kicked that one. It's a joke. But this is the most I've ever spoken with Joe. He's just at the top of my screen. But yeah. but I wrote almost every day for about 5-6 years. And most of the time, my thoughts seemed irrelevant to whether I wrote or not. What seemed to matter was that I showed up to write. And if I hang in there in that space to write long enough, words just kind of appear. It's sort of how I experience the phenomena of writing. And I could say the same thing of meditation. Half the time I don't want to meditate. I don't see value in it, but I just show up to meditate. And then usually I sit there for about an hour and I'm done. And I don't think I've missed a day in about 2.5 decades. And same with meetings, right? For those of us who have been around, it doesn't matter what I think or what I believe about meetings or the value of meetings or recovery. Half the time I think this is garbage, bullshit, but I still go to meetings and I do my best. And once I show up, I stay open-minded to listening to what's being said and whatever's coming out, and something happens. I don't know why I got into that. But, well, I guess because I'm trying to connect it. It's a really tenuous connection, but I'm trying to connect how phenomenology has informed my recovery in my life, which is that because of that attitude, I'm interested in paying attention to what is the nature of experience? What is the nature of a particular phenomena? And I'm trying not to lean on authority or, my own inclinations or preferences. And I'm trying to see things more and more clearly. I'll just make, so if I'm interested in experience, one of the interesting things is language, right? And Japanese, I would say, is a phenomenologically rich language. So for example, what I mean by that is, like in Japanese, if I want to say I'm angry, I say, hara ga tatsu. And that means my stomach stands. That's how I say I'm angry. My stomach stands. And what I've noticed is that when I'm angry, there's a feeling as if something in my stomach is rising. So the description describes my experience. In English, the word anger is so abstracted that it has no connection to my experience. Whereas a description like you're hot-headed or I'm hot-headed does have has a more obvious connection to the actual experience of anger, right? If the stomach stands and the energy rises, my head gets hot. And so some English language, I think, one would say is phenomenologically resonant or rich, and others is so removed. But a word like anger, again, I would say is fairly abstract. But one nice thing about nowadays is there are etymological dictionaries, or I guess they've been around for a while. And, language, I think, has arisen not in some entirely arbitrary or random way, but out of experience. And so the original words of meanings oftentimes contain that connection to original experience. And so when one looks at the derivation of anger, it comes from an Indo-Asian word, ang. The word ang is the root word for anger, anxiety, anguish, angst. And they all come from the same root word. And it means to be constricted, to be narrowed, to be tightened. And to me, that does resonate. It does connect for me, to the experience of anger and anguish and so on. And so when I think of anger, I think of it as, I'm being tight. My mind's tight. If my mind's relaxed and open, it's hard to sustain anger. It's hard to sustain anxiety. It's hard to sustain anguish for me. But the mind and the body can get tight. So that's another way in which, for me, the phenomenological attitude. And so the reason why I mention that is because, this is called the secular experiences. And I assume that that's a contrast to the word spiritual. And I think the word spiritual is kind of loaded in our culture. A lot of people conflate spiritual with religious. So other people correlate spiritual with like some kind of ethereal, metaphysical sort of thing. But, I'm guessing at least half of you here know that the root word of spiritual, it comes from the Latin spiritus. And spiritus has a number of meanings, but its primary meaning is breath or to breathe. So for me, spiritual, as a phenomenologist, is too abstract of a notion. It's too conceptualized. But when I hear the word spiritual, I just simply think breath. So my definition of spiritual is that which supports the breath. When I think of others, I'm more relaxed, so my breath is more open and deep and relaxed. When I'm obsessed with myself, I get tight and my breath gets tight. And so I listen to some people who, for example, are religious, and they talk about God, and they'll talk about, they feel guilty that they don't have enough faith. And I can feel, it seems to me that they're tight, so their breath isn't good. So my attitude, this is my judgment, but my attitude when I listen to someone like that is, this person's religion isn't serving their spirituality. Whereas other people, for example, I have someone very close to me who's Christian. When she talks about her faith, there's a kind of a relaxed quality, and I can tell that her breath is deeper, and it causes me to relax around her. So I think this person's faith is spiritual only because of the indicator of breath. And I know people who have no interest in religion, whose minds are relaxed, whose hearts are relaxed, whose breath is always open and deep. And I think this is a spiritual person. So I don't know. It's 21 minutes, so I think I should stop. That was my best attempt at trying to connect the topic to my recovery. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much. You really appreciate that. Yeah, so we're going to move on. Harry has asked if she can go, if she can come up next. So Harry, yeah, come on in. It's your turn, hon. I can't see Harry. Let me see if I can find her. Does she? You're muted.
Hello. Hello. No, I'm not now.
Oh, there
I
you
had to
go.
wait for the host to unmute me because it was stopping me. Anyway, right. Hello. I'm Harry. I'm a person in recovery. I'm really glad Zanner said she was nervous because I'm really nervous too. So apologies, because I always sound a bit shambolic anyway, and when I'm nervous, I'm going to be even worse. So I won't be very together. But anyway, let me start a timer, because that's the other thing I'll do is go on for hours. When Zanner asked me to do this, I love talking about neurodiversity, but in terms of trying to sort of pin it into recovery and so on, I wrote a load of notes, which I'm trying to get up on my phone now, which, there we are, right. So I thought, first of all, what I'd do is just talk a very little bit about neurodivergence itself, because it's a funny word and it's a very new concept, really. It's not a new thing. It's been around forever, but I'm part of a group recovery group that has a definition of neurodiversity. So what I'm going to do is read out that to start with, because that's somebody else has thought that one up. Neurodiversity is a relatively new concept that presents neurological differences as normal variations rather than pathological disorders. It refers to the brain's development of neurological pathways that influence performance or functioning, such as intellectual functioning, reading ability, social skills, memory, attention, and focus skills. Some neurodivergent conditions are autism, ADHD, and OCD. So that's kind of a definition. When I started thinking about what I was going to say, I thought I'd better look, get Dr. Google, or Monsieur Google as it is in France, and there seem to be bits of neurodiversity that I wasn't even aware of, one of which is acquired neurodiversity, which is if you have a brain injury or a stroke, there's all sorts of things that can lead to you having neurodiversity. Some of those things will be possible to be cured. So if you've got a brain injury, it can improve, and you can lose some of the things that would bring you within that umbrella. Some of the things can't be. Like if you're born autistic, your chances are you'll stay autistic. Although I used to have trouble persuading the benefits agency in the UK about that, because they seem to think my son might get cured at some point. Anyway, the thing that I've discovered from my reading about excuse me, neurodiversity is that you can see it on brain scans. So that seems a good sort of starting point. If you do a brain scan, you can kind of see bits of brain that are doing different things to your standard brain, whatever a standard brain is, which is another concept. Obviously, what the hell is normal? But that would take too long to even start on. And recent developments in brain scanning, they've developed a thing called fMRI scanning, which is basically watching the brain firing up electrical synapses and things according to what's going on inside it. And that's been really amazing in terms of understanding autism and understanding neurodiversity. So in recent years, a hell of a lot more is known about it. But going back to where I started to be aware of it, well, the first time I was aware of it was when I was a kid, and my mum had a job looking after an autistic kid who bit her. So that was my first understanding of autism, that it made you bite people. Then when I was older, when I was an adult, my son, I was 36 when I had my son, and when he was 6, he was diagnosed with autism and ADHD and various other bits and bobs as well. So he had letters after his name quite early on, really. And the school was referred him for this because his behaviour at school was a bit wild. His behaviour at home, we never had another child, so we didn't really know what children were supposed to go on like. I thought he was a bit eccentric and certainly hard to manage, but I thought that was me being a bad mother, because my own history had a bit of bad mothering going on in it, so I just assumed it was genetic. So I didn't really understand that my son was autistic or ADHD or anything. And I was quite relieved to discover that it was actually brain wiring and not bad mothering. It gave me a big sigh of relief. And as a parent of an autistic person, there's a whole lot of stuff that I had to make decisions about with his father, who I'm not with anymore, but we had to kind of make decisions about, firstly, were we going to tell him? Secondly, how would we present it as a label? Did we like labels or not? Because there's political views about this. There's all kinds of views about all this stuff. And so we came up with that it was a gift, and that the reason that it was tricky was that the rest of society made life difficult. It wasn't that there was anything wrong with my son, it was that society didn't really allow for people being a bit different. And I'm quite glad that was how we approached it, because in later years, when I came to realise that this label also affected me, I kind of already had a framework to put around my head. So moving on, my son's now 27, and I was diagnosed officially with ADHD last year. So I was, what am I now, 63? I was 62 when I was diagnosed. And anybody who knew anything about kids with ADHD would have known I had ADHD from when I could talk, basically. I was always completely wild, unmanageable, etc., quite disturbed. And because girls were never thought to have ADHD, it was always put down as a negative thing in children, particularly in girls. It was always seen as negative all the way through for boys as well. So the self-esteem stuff started quite early, that, you're a nuisance, you're in the way, you're always doing the wrong thing, you're clumsy, blah, 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 blah. And so on. And there were a lot of other dysfunctional things about my childhood that aren't really to do with any of this, other than that. But both my biological parents and probably my stepmom, who brought me up from when I was 8, are also neurodiverse, although none of them have been diagnosed. But looking at them with my kind of pseudo doctor eye on, I would have them down in the spectrum somewhere. So you take a kind of bunch of people who are all a bit off the normal, and you get a dysfunctional family without any question. There are all sorts of issues going on. So my behaviour and the way I always put my not feeling I belonged and all the stuff that goes with that to the fact that I came from this kind of can of worms of a family, and didn't really ever think about myself as a person with any kind of neurological issues. And it wasn't until well into adulthood, my son was probably almost an adult by the time that I started to think that actually, as well as all that, there was stuff that was part of the autism and so on spectrum. There are a whole lot of physical things that go with autism. There are a whole lot of sensory things and so on. I'll use the word autism, but there are neurodiversity covers a hell of a lot more things than just autism. But for me, the bit I know about is autism and ADHD. I don't know, bipolar comes within it, but I don't know a lot about bipolar. I know people with it, but I couldn't talk myself of it. So for me, I grew up feeling like I didn't belong. Went to my first AA meeting. I started drinking at 13. Sorry, I told you I'd dot about. Started drinking at 13, carried on till I was 50. So my first AA meeting, I was 50. Went along there, and my first meeting, I was really aware that I had found my tribe, a huge feeling of it. There were about 30 people there. And I got home and I said to my then husband, there's loads of people there who've got autistic kids, and loads of the people in that circles, there are about 30 odd of them. I said most of them seem to be either autistic or ADHD, because I've got this kind of radar where I reckon I can spot it on people. And my time in the fellowship, there's certainly that has been borne out. I think there is a higher proportion of people with neurodiversity within recovery than there are in the general population. I think there's been some research about it, but I couldn't for the life of you, tell you where it is or anything. But anyway, so, and it's not surprising really, because one of the things about having any kind of neurodiverse condition is that you don't feel you fit in, and that you have a lot of sensory stuff going on. So my son, for example, can't bear loud noise, bright lights. We used to go shopping with him wearing headphones and sunglasses, and that kind of thing. And so if the world is an overwhelmingly noisy, overwhelming place, you're going to find, if you discover a way of stopping that being a problem, it's going to be helpful. And in my case, it was pints of Guinness, followed by all sorts of other alcohol. Drugs were never really part of my story in the way that they are of some people's. Dabbled a bit, but not really. It was really alcohol. And I suddenly was able to kind of join the dots, and it just shut my head up enough for me to be able to function and be a sociable person. And I was quite a shy person as a teenager, and it suddenly meant I could talk to people and all the stuff that people, we've all sort of had that, we've heard it from people in meetings and so on. And so my career as a drinker went on for 37 years in total, and I got the dangerous bit was early on. I indulged in risky behaviour as a youngster, but by the time I was in my 40s, because I stopped at 50, I was boring. I was just sitting there getting drunk in front of the telly and forgetting who killed the person in the murder mystery, that kind of thing. It was really dull. And eventually got along to a meeting. I won't, it was a typical sort of scenario. Well, I will tell you. I said I wasn't going to tell you. I went to a hypnotherapist because I thought they'd be able to stop me drinking, and she said, "Well, I can't, but I'm in AA, and I'll take you to a meeting." So that's how I got to my first meeting. But there are other stuff as well. Anyway, and I'm one of the lucky ones. I've stayed sober ever since. I haven't relapsed, and I put that down to quite a lot of things. But the main thing is meetings and the people in the fellowship. I've always been an atheist. I wasn't christened as a child. I was brought up by atheists, never had any religion. My stepmom's a lapsed Catholic. So there was a bit of religion in our family, but very, very lapsed. And so I didn't really have a kind of God-shaped space to put the higher power concept into when I came into recovery. I was very lucky because my next door neighbour had a fairly major rock bottom the year before, and we talked a lot about his recovery, and I'd been quite involved with sort of picking him up off the floor really quite a lot. And so I had quite a strong idea that he was an atheist as well, and he's still in recovery. And so I had quite a good idea that you could be an atheist and still be in AA, even though there was all this God stuff. But it was a tricky one for me because I kept feeling I wasn't doing it right. And because my message had always been, you don't do anything right, you're always a disaster. It was just like, oh, I'm not even doing recovery right. And somehow it hadn't sunk in that doing recovery right just meant not getting pissed every night. I was actually doing recovery 100% right every single day. I was going to bed sober. But my default position being that I'm rubbish, didn't really have space for that. The other thing that about recovery was that I took the message. I don't know whether people were giving me the message. It's certainly what I took the message to be, was that you had to squash down all your natural instincts. Everything you'd already believed was not the case, and you had to swap it for something that was a kind of a structure of thinking that was different and was, it was completely alien to me. And so I spent quite a lot of time squashing down my instincts, not going along with gut feelings, because I'd been told that everything I believed up till now wasn't right. And that wasn't all that helpful, in fact. And after about 7 years into recovery, I was still going to mainstream meetings because I didn't discover secular AA. Well, really, I had discovered it slightly before COVID, but obviously COVID has brought it to all of our doorsteps, as it were. But I was going to meetings. I've always shared at every meeting I'm at. I was told really early on, make sure you always share at every meeting. And if I don't, that's usually because I'm feeling really dire. And because I shared my truth, as people call it, so i.e. I didn't have a higher power, and that I worked I didn't call it a secular secular program then. I just said I'm an atheist, and I'm quite spiritual because I am quite kind of hippy dippy about trees and flowers and animals and stuff. So I kind of worked around it all, and people really took it as a threat. There were certain people in particular who were really, well, they bullied me. There's no other word for it. They were really unpleasant and would cross share afterwards about how you find God or die, that kind of stuff. And it really got to me big time. And in those days, obviously, you only could go to meetings that you could geographically get to. So that was a bit of a problem. And I knew that meetings were what kept me sober. And so I spent a hell of a lot of time doing research into the history of AA and how the Big Book was written and how, all the stuff behind it. And I'm really grateful to those people now, because they did give me a really good grounding in how all this stuff developed and how I can fit in within it. And so I did do a lot of thinking about it. And one thing that I came up with really was that my going along with my instinct was actually not as stupid as I had been told, and that my instincts are actually pretty good. And I kind of came along the way, I came up with a sort of head, heart and gut kind of theory, which, as I now know, sort of fits in with a thing called polyvagal theory, which I've read loads about that as well. Because one of the things about the sort of ADHD mind is that you're like a Hoover on the internet. I just read everything about any subject I get involved in. So anyway, in terms of my recovery, which is, I suppose, what I'm supposed to be talking about, I have now moved much more towards my recovery being, oh dear, I've finished my 15 minutes. You might have to have a bit more of me, because otherwise it's I won't get very far with how I do it. My recovery is kind of based on what works for me, and it's not exactly what the Big Book says, but it has been adapted quite a lot. So the way I do a typical day, if it's going well, I get out of bed. I have to treat myself like a puppy, so I'm not allowed to have a cup of tea till I've done my morning bits and bobs that I do to do with recovery, because I can't be trusted to do them once I've had a cup of tea, because then I'll get distracted. So I get out of bed and I do my yoga straight away. And then when I'm lying on my back after my yoga, I do some affirmations, and they've changed over the years, but I've thought them through quite a lot. I'm a lawyer by trade, so I spent a lot of time, honing the words to get them exactly right. And so I say, the first one I say is, I am kind, because that is the most important thing to me, kindness. And whether it's kindness to people or the planet or anything else, that's vital to me. And then the next thing is, I behave with honour and integrity. And that doesn't necessarily mean that I think with honour and integrity, but my behaviour has to be. So sometimes I might want to like steal something or whatever, but I don't do it because of the behaviour thing. It has to kind of, be stuck on there. And then when I'm troubled, I pause and reflect. And that's something I've learned from recovery, because ADHD people tend not to pause ever. And we tend to, I'll buy a car and then think afterwards, oh, was that a great idea? I bought 2 houses on the spur of the moment in the past. So, I'm terribly impulsive. So I pause and reflect. Then, but the next thing that I say is, I trust in the ebb and flow of the universe. so that that's kind of acceptance. Whatever the world throws at me, I will swallow it, get on with it, learn from it. I try and learn from pretty much everything that happens, even if it's the miserable stuff. And then the final thing, which was tacked on later on, was I will not fear the void in I think I'll call it a void inside me. It is a place of growth. And that was added on because of the feelings of anxiety and that sort of hole in the soul thing that alcohol used to fill. I don't fear it anymore. I think to myself, well, there's some reason for this, you know, this will be all right in the end, kind of thing. And I've got a lot more confident that things will be all right in the end, which I never felt safe. I never used to feel that things would be all right. And you know, life is beginning to prove that they, generally speaking, are. The other thing that when I gave up drinking, I was diagnosed with complex PTSD as well. And that gives you, one of the symptoms is hypervigilance, which it fits in quite well with my instinct stuff, because, you know, I have great instinct around people, that I can pick up all sorts of, you know, cues and so on. That doesn't always go with neurodiverse people. Some people don't pick up cues, but I overpick them up. That's just a by the by. I was telling you about my day, wasn't I? I try and get to meetings. In the morning I do a reading from the Beyond Belief book, and I try and get to a meeting most days, which I can with Zoom. I've started going to adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families now as well, because, you know, it's high time I start looking at some of this stuff that's, you know, that goes on in my head to do with the self-esteem and all that kind of thing. So I get to as many meetings as possible. And the one thing I've taken from all the friends I've had who've relapsed is they stopped going to meetings. That seems to be out of everything. It wasn't that they stopped reading the big book. It wasn't that they stopped praying, you know, because quite a few of my friends are atheists or whatever. Although I have got a lot of religious friends as well, funnily enough. And so anyway, the meetings is a really big deal, because it reminds me that I've got a tribe. They are people that have got my back. And I've always said it's like being held by a giant pair of hands. I know that if I really cock something up, then there'll be somebody who says, I've done worse than that. You know, there's always someone in the fellowship who's done something more stupid than I have. And that's just so comforting, really, because, you know, you can cringe with embarrassment about things or shame or whatever. So yeah, the fellowship is a huge thing for me. Excuse me. The people and the kindness. You know, people have been really, really kind to me over the years. When I first got sober, everything fell to bits for me. I was working. I had a marriage, had a 24-year marriage to another drinker who's still a drinker. So that kind of came to an end fairly quickly. And I ended up living in a converted pigsty on state benefits without even my dog living with me. And that was a really good thing to happen. But at the time, it all felt a bit bleak. But it taught me that I don't need half of the trappings that I'd surrounded myself by, like fancy cars and all that stuff. And my sponsor at the time, I've always had a sponsor. It's mostly been the same person who is still my sponsor, in fact. But I love the idea of lots of other people being your sponsors and not knowing it. I'm definitely going to adopt that too. But my sponsor's now in her 80s, and she hugs trees. She goes to Tesco's and she hug a tree on the way. That's the kind of, she doesn't give a shit what anyone thinks. And you know, I love that. I love that in a person. And yeah, so I've got a sponsor. I sponsor other people. One of the people that I sponsor, two of them are people that are atheists like me. One is a very, very religious person who knows my views and asked me to sponsor her anyway. And she goes out for walks with her dog and has arguments with God in the woods. She'll like shout up at the sky at God, which I don't know why she thought I'd be a good sponsor. It does work really, really well. I don't know why it works, but it does. So, you know, I think, to me, connection with other people, particularly with other people in recovery, is vital. And I get so much more out of Zoom than I ever did out of personal meetings, partly because I can do it more often, and partly because my PTSD in the UK, when I lived there, made crowds really difficult. I used to have panic attacks. And so sitting in a meeting when you're trying not to have a panic attack was really hard. So I don't get them on Zoom, obviously. And yeah, so anyway, I'll grind to a halt there because I could just ramble on for hours. And sorry that was all over the place, but that's part of being neurodiverse. So anyway, that just gives you a good illustration of how shambolic my thinking is. But thanks for helping me stay sober today.
Oh, thank you very much, Harry. You can continue talking because then that means I can hold off still before I have to start sharing. Thank you for your share. I appreciate it. I'm going to start my alarm as well. Hi, Zanner. Oh, breathe. It's okay. Okay, I'm going to go a little bit more of the traditional route and share a little bit about my experience, strength, and hope. I find it helps me stay in life, keeping things linear, right? Sort of help keep me on track. So I come from a family that is inflicted with mental health and addiction for multiple generations. And I was born a heroin baby. My mom's an addict, and she unfortunately died as an addict. She never got clean, but she had 3 kids along the way. And my sister, we're all born addicts, and my sister passed away as an infant from complications. And then there's my brother and myself, and he has a lot of mental health and addiction problems and stuff like that. And he's unfortunately not in the rooms. But I grew up in a really chaotic household where children should not be. I won't go into a lot of details about it, but there was a lot of unpredictability. There was a lot of inappropriate activities that were going on with adults and children. A lot of abuse, a lot of neglect. Just not an environment for nurturing a healthy child. When I was very young when the first diagnoses of mental health came into play for me. I was in grade 3. Up until that point, from kindergarten to grade 2, all my report cards were like, oh, she's a chatterbox and she's very social and all this kind of stuff. But then when I got to grade 3, I had developed a syndrome where I was mute and I couldn't speak anymore. And they'd sent me to doctors and psychiatrists and all sorts of stuff. And they had labeled me as being mentally retarded and incapable of learning. So they pulled me from school and they put me in special ed classes. And I stayed in special ed classes until I left school in grade 9. When I got to high school, I was like, I'm done with this, and I left. But what I learned along the way from that experience was that I wasn't okay. Right? When you have parents and any kind of authority, right? Parents, teachers, doctors, all that kind of stuff, sitting there and judging you and labeling you and saying that you're not okay. As a kid, you believe that, especially when you feel like you're not okay. I spent most of my time trying not to be who I was. I started off by hiding myself physically in the home. I started off by looking at you to tell me, for me to figure out how to be so I would be safe. So I started learning how to be who I wasn't, because it wasn't okay being me. And then I started, when that wasn't working anymore, I started disassociating, right? So now I have diagnoses of being mentally retarded, incapable of learning, and dissociative disorder. I was medicated a lot as a child from my mom. She used to medicate my brother and myself to help keep us under control. And when by the time I hit 12 years old, I took that on myself and started self-medicating. And I started that by first things that I picked up were drugs. It wasn't alcohol, it was drugs. It was marijuana, it was hash, it was acid, you know, LSD, all that kind of stuff, right? I was off to the races with that. So I had learned very young and very, which became my life and my identity, was that I'm not okay, I'm not good enough. I'm stupid. I can't learn. My value, my worthiness isn't really worth anything. And I can be okay when I'm high. That's what I learned. You know, by the time I was 12, was also the first time that I had attempted suicide. And I did that by literally walking myself out in front of traffic in a car. Got hit by a car. And I ended up busting up both my legs. But it was the only way that I felt I could be okay, was not to be here. You know, I've learned in recovery now, right, that these are all, you know, coping mechanisms that I've learned, and that there were ways that all these things that I was doing, all this hiding, that's disassociating, the trying to mask myself to be who I thought you needed me to be, all this self-harm, the addiction, all that kind of stuff was my way of trying to protect myself, trying to keep myself safe, you know, because I wasn't okay being me. By the time I was 24 and I came to recovery, I had multiple ODs, lots of alcohol poisoning, in and out of hospitals, spent more time on the streets, sleeping in the subways and in parks, being homeless, eating out of garbage cans, and just existing. I had no will to live. I had no will to be here whatsoever. I wasn't even surviving anymore. I was just existing, you know, because in my mind, that's all there was. You know, when I came to the rooms, I ended up having to go. I came into the rooms through medical detox first, because I was having DTs and seizures and all that kind of stuff. So I was hospitalized for a while with that. And then they put me in the psych ward. And in the psych ward was where all these other diagnoses came in, right? First, I got the bipolar, and I got the multiple personality, and I got the ADHD, and I got like all this kind of stuff. And then in came all the different medications. And then while I was going through all that, I had a lot of stints being in the rubber room, literally locked up in the rubber room. And it was literally a rubber room. It had like these sort of mattresses on the wall. And it was just this little cubby hole. And there's a little hole in the door where they had someone sitting there watching you for 24 hours because I was deemed a threat to myself and other people. It was in that space, in that darkness, in that confined space, was the only time that I felt okay. The only time, the more disconnected I was from myself, the more I felt okay. So I carried that disconnection with me in recovery. when I left the hospital, I started coming to meetings, and I started working the steps, and I tried to do the God thing. I tried to do, the praying and the, the making the amends and all the stuff that was required to do, because again, that's what I'm good at, is morphing myself into what I think you need me to be okay. Right. So when I came into mainstream AA, that fit like a glove for a while for me, because I was really good at faking it till you make it. Right. So I love that slogan, right? Fake it till you make it. Just like, oh, I can do that. Right. That's what I've done my whole life. So I did that for a while, and things on the outside started coming together. Right. I actually went to school and I got an education. I started working. I got an apartment. I got a girlfriend. I started, like, all these things on the outside started coming together, but the inside still wasn't there, because I was still just faking it till I made it. I was trying to work other people's programs to be okay. I was trying to still not be me, because I still wasn't okay being me. There was more hospital visits. There was more adjustments to medications. I've been on so many different psychiatric medications because of my depression and anxiety and all that kind of stuff. When I came into the rooms in 1991, and in the mainstream meetings then, right, you didn't talk about, medication and mental health and all that kind of stuff was considered an outside issue. And you didn't talk about that stuff, right? And I actually had people say to me that, to encourage me to go off of my medication, because it was considered a mind mood altering substance. And because I was on that, I wasn't clean and sober. So there was a lot of messages that I was getting from the program that was actually conflicting with my mental health, was actually was hurting me more than helping me. Right. Some of those messages that were coming in, and some of those messages that were coming in that I was first getting from the program, I was also looking at a lens, through the only lens that I knew, which was the stuff from my childhood that I learned. And some of the messages I was getting in AA were also paralleling those messages that I got as a child. Do stuff. There's something wrong in the world. It's your fault. It's because there's something wrong with you. Right. And just different things like this. Right. So I struggled. And by the time I was reaching 10 years of sobriety, right, I was going through I had another bout of major depression, and I had and I was still really struggling with my mental health about, fitting in and being a part of and being okay, and wanting to be here. Still had a lot of suicidal ideology and all that kind of stuff, because I still wasn't okay inside. I still wasn't okay being me. And about 6 weeks before my 10th year, I OD'd. I went out and I was just like, this isn't working for me, right? Like, I'm not okay here. I'm not okay being sober. I'm not okay being in AA, right? I'm one of those ones that's constitutionally incapable. Like, I'm so emotionally damaged and so damaged psychologically that I'm not going to make it. I haven't made it. Right. And then, so I attempted suicide again. And again, obviously, I woke up. I don't know who found me. Because the times that I have done that, I don't reach out to people to say I'm not okay. I go off on my own, because the times that I have actually attempted suicide, not just thought about it, but attempted it. I come to a point of resolution within myself that I actually did find some peace, because there's going to be an end to my suffering. So it wasn't, there's no cry for help. There's no talking to people. There's no looking for outside anything. It's just go and do it. So I don't know who found me, but I know that I woke up in the hospital like 4 or 5 days later, coming off a ventilator again. Right. And then back in the psych ward. When I came out of the psych ward at that time, gains all new medications and all that kind of stuff. I didn't think that, I never came back to AA because I thought I tried it. It didn't work. It's not for me. I came out of the hospital again with the resolution that, there's no help for me out here. There's nothing here for me. There's no help for me. I either need to just exist until I don't exist anymore. There's no solution. I'm just a broken person. There's no solution. So again, I just tried to pull my life together again, try to get back to work, try to have, a bit of like settle with, what, I got a home. I've got food, I've got clothes on my back, food in the fridge. What more do I want? Why would I try and achieve more than that? Just having those successes are good enough, right? I'm not going to try and be like this happy, healthy, free kind of stuff. It's just like, that's just not in the cards for me, right? And I came to a level of defeat with that, which I thought at the time was an acceptance, right? But it was just like I was defeated, right? So there wasn't even like I was hopeless. I had no hope whatsoever, So life continued, and I continued to show up the best way that I knew how to show up. And again, things started coming together, right? Got another job, met someone, and actually got married. We started doing things. We started traveling the world. We were like all these outside things were like, again, coming together. But still in here, nothing, it's like I see it like it's almost like an iceberg, right? Where above the water, what you see, all this stuff was grand, but underneath here was just this dark abyss of nothingness, and I was frozen. Like I didn't know how to go there. I thought that like that stuff was off limits. That was like a no-go zone, right? That was the stuff that was so damaged. There was never going to be any peace or healing with that. So I just continued to stay away from that. What ended up happening was that I found secular AA, right? Again, it was a cycle. It was like another, I found secular AA at the beginning of the pandemic. So at that point, I had another, I continued with my sobriety, I attempted suicide. So I used drugs to attempt suicide, but I didn't realize, I didn't go back out using, right? Like when I came out of the hospital, I wasn't doing drugs. I stayed sober and clean, right? But I wasn't coming to AA. When I found secular AA, again, I got to another point, right? 18 years later, after my last suicide attempt, that I'm standing on my balcony, butt ass naked, ready to jump, and there was something inside me. It was actually my dog, Max, right? He was sitting there whimpering and whining, right? And I'm standing here by myself, and I'm just like, I can't leave Max. And that's the main thing that got me off the balcony this time was my dog, right? Like what's going to happen to Max, So I came in, one of the things that I was missing about AA was the fellowship. I was missing the connection with other people. So I decided I'm going to just, so I went on to I went on to Google and I searched the Toronto Intergroup to find a meeting, and I found that there was the Toronto Beyond Belief meeting. So I zoomed into there, and the first person I see is Joe. And I was just like, oh my God. So I know Joe from outside of the rooms. I don't know him from AA, but I know him from a mutual friend of ours that is a very dear, dear person that we both like love immensely. And I've had lots of interactions with Joe outside of AA. And so it was great to see him there. Right. So as soon as I saw him, I started feeling like, okay, this is good. I can do this. Right. And I started coming back to secular meetings. And then I decided to go back to therapy. But this time I found a trauma therapist. And I started going to trauma therapy. And I called my doctor and I said, I'm not okay. And then she hooked me up with a psychiatrist. And they took me, did my assessment and all that kind of stuff. And I had more different diagnoses. It's like diagnosis of ADHD and diagnosis of OCD and like all this kind of stuff. And they put me on this whole new regime of medication, right? Because I was a basket case. Like I was like in a constant state of anxiety, a constant state of panic attacks, hyperventilating, just not being okay, not being able to sleep, all that kind of stuff. So I got back to reaching out to people for help again. And coming to secular and free thinking AA, one of the biggest thing that I learned, the biggest thing that was offered to me was to find my own program, was the freedom to not follow a program that was written by, middle-aged, white, straight stockbrokers from the 1930s, right? It was to find the principles, to find my principles, and to find my program. I was encouraged and supported in this self-acceptance that I'm okay who I am as I am, right? I'm not something that has to be fixed. I'm not something that has to be changed, right? So what I've learned to do, right, is I've learned to, through my therapy, through secular AA, through the fellowship, through the people that I've met here, is I've learned to hold your hand while I take myself and I walk myself through that place of darkness. I walk myself through that place, that abyss that was the no-go zone, right? And I find that I go in there, right, through all my experiences, through all the diagnosis, through all the stigmas, through all the boxes that I've been put in, right, through all the experiences that I've had that have said, this is who you are, right? This is what your value is. This is what your worth is. This is what you're good enough to do, what you're not good enough to do, right? I've been able to walk through all of that, holding your hand, to find me hiding in there, in that hiding place, right? And to take me with my other hand and to walk myself through that. And so I've learned to go in and bring myself up. I've learned to go into the darkness and to find my light, right? So it's really ironic that I've come to secular AA to have my spiritual awakening, right? I've come to secular AA to learn how to work the God steps, right? Because it actually has nothing to do with God and it has nothing to do with religion, right? For me, it has to do with self-acceptance. For me, it has to do with freeing myself, and it's about healing myself, not changing myself. It's about accepting, yeah, it's like I'm an alcoholic, right? And learn how to live with that. I have mental health, I have depression, I have anxiety, I'm OCD, I'm all this kind of stuff. It's about learning the acceptance of all these parts of me, right? And being okay with them and learning how to live with them and to heal through them, as opposed to forcing myself to try and change them, as opposed to forcing myself of like, oh, that's not okay. Right? Alcoholic, that's not okay. Mental health, that's not okay. It's freeing myself from all those judgments. It's moving myself beyond the belief, right? Moving beyond the belief, the restrictions of my beliefs, right? Because it's my beliefs, it's my judgments, it's all those things that hurt me today. It's not my hurt that hurts me today. My fear doesn't hurt me. My pain doesn't hurt me. When I embrace those parts of me, when I embrace those experiences, that's where I find my healing, and that's where I find me. So it's not about changing who I am. It's about embracing who I am and freeing myself from the stigmas and the judgments and the restrictions of all of those things. Right? So when I sit and I listen, it's like, yeah, you're not okay being who you are. I'm just like, well, yeah, okay, that's a judgment. That's not true. When I'm scared, when I'm terrified, like I go to therapy and I what you do microdose in my therapy, right? I take every time half an hour before I go to my therapy session twice a week, I take lorazepam, which is an anti-anxiety medication. Because when I go to therapy, I'm fucking frozen. When I have to go into my darkness, I'm frozen. I'm terrified. Absolutely fucking terrified. Right? So a combination of this anti-anxiety medication, a combination of the trust and safety that I'm developed with my therapist and that I'm developing with myself. That's the biggest thing, is developing that relationship with myself. Right? The combination of all that kind of stuff, I'm okay being afraid today because I'm learning to nurture myself and love myself through that fear. I'm learning to accept myself for who I am with all these different parts, right? So when I'm anxious, I learn to be okay being anxious. When I'm struggling with my mental health and my depression, I'm learning to be okay when I'm depressed. When I'm struggling with my flashbacks and with my trauma and with all that stuff, I'm learning to be okay with those things, right? I don't fight them anymore. I don't try to change them. I don't try to deny them. I embrace them and I accept them for what they are because they're parts of who I am. And I'm learning to love myself and have compassion for myself. And this acceptance, this letting go, this radical acceptance of who I am, this letting go of the fight and of the judgment, right? Steps 1, 2, and 3, right? Step 4 of going in and finding who I am. Step 5 of bringing myself out and being who I am here. Step 6, 7 of you know what? Like I have choices today, right? I have learned that there are many, many ways that I can show up today. I got this thing called Choice Point, right? It includes my thoughts, right? Whenever I have like all these like really negative thoughts, right? I can choose to accept those thoughts and they can take me away from my path of recovery, or I can choose to let go of those thoughts, right? And stay on my path of recovery, right? I have esteemable actions. I choose esteemable actions. I choose esteemable thoughts today, right? And it's like it was shared earlier, right? It's like action. When I do these things, then the serenity comes, then the peace comes, right? But I have choices today, right? On how to be and how to show up, right? And I'm choosing to show up as an authentic person. I'm choosing to free myself from all this dogma that's been put on me, all these judgments that's been put on me, all these boxes that I've been put in, right? So I don't change who I am. I accept who I am. And I free myself so who was it? It was the guy who did the statue of David and the I forget his name.
Michelangelo.
Thank you. Yes. So he's quoted as saying that in the statues and the paintings and stuff, that statue of David was inside the marble, and it's a matter of removing the pieces that don't belong. And then he was revealed. And that's how I show up today. I'm removing all these things that don't belong of me, and I am being revealed. Right. And that's how I'm showing up today. And it's a scary place to be, and it's a beautiful place to be. And I am now in a place that I actually want to live. I don't want to exist. I don't want to survive. I live today. I live today because of the recovery that I found in secular AA. I live today because of the healing that I find going in my darkness. I live today because I accept my darkness. I accept my trauma. I accept my mental health. I accept everything about me today as being authentic and real, and honor these things and love all of these parts of me today. So I get to be whole, and I get to be here. And it's a beautiful thing. And I'm really grateful for all of you. I went over my time. I'm sorry, but it's wonderful to be here. Thank you very much.
Right. Thanks, Zanner. And thank you all of our panelists. Wow. Great stuff. Really appreciate their being here. We're going to open the room up for Q&A for a period of time. We'll see how long we can go. Please use the raise hand function. If you're on the phone, hit *9, and we'll try and call on you in order. You need to unmute yourself if you want to share. We also are opening up the chat, so you can use that if you want to send it that way. Remember, we are recording this, so keep anonymity in mind. And we also ask that you remember that this is a Freethinkers meeting, so we aspire to open-mindedness and not trying to dissuade or argue or disrespect anyone else. And I have a timer here, so after 3 minutes, you might want to wrap it up. And Zanner, do you want to go ahead and call on people as they raise their hands?
Sure. Thanks very much. Kat, come on in.
I'm Kat Little Creek, and I'm an alcoholic. And I don't share. I don't talk in these meetings. And I just want to say thank you, Zanner. In so many ways, you told my story. And I don't think I've ever heard it. I've been sober a long time. I got sober in 1985. And I don't know how, but I stayed sober. And I just wanted to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. You gave me some ideas that I hadn't figured out, with therapy or anything else. I hadn't figured out the attitudes that you're walking with. And I'm going to try them. All else fails, take a suggestion, right? That's all I got. Thanks for letting me talk.
Thanks very much. Appreciate that. This is a safe place. Please check in so you don't check out. Jeb, come on in.
Need to unmute, Jeb.
I've asked you to unmute, Jeb. Yeah. I'm asking you to unmute, Jeb. So
yeah, I hate that thing. It's just confusing to me. But thanks so much, all of you, for your wonderful, thoughtful shares and openness, because it reminded me how important the process of recovery has been for me from the very beginning. And it reminded me that when I was in graduate school, I had a professor who said, process, well, actually, he said process is our most important product. And I believe in sponsorship, that's what it's all about too, is trying to model for someone else, as Bill Wilson did for us, the things that I can actually do, the actions, as Yuichi talked about, the actions I can take in order to produce the kinds of results that are spoken of in that serenity goal or serenity prayer. And if I didn't take the actions and didn't find that tap into that unsuspected inner resource that allowed me to do things that I didn't think I could ever do, to take the risks of success or failure, and to learn from my failures as well as my successes, a better way to live, I wouldn't be here today. And so regardless how people approach this, I learned something from everyone else's sharing of what they've done and are doing to enjoy the life that you all have today. And I just value this experience so much. And I'm still waiting for Joe's book on the varieties of recovery experience. And I know it'll come. We just keep pushing him, and he has to find time to write and sit down and fight the demons that say, I don't know what to do. But what a wonderful meeting. I love you all. And today is day because of you and what Bill Wilson wrote for me on pages 60 through 88. This is day 16,101. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeb. Appreciate that. Marcus, come on in.
Hey everybody, I'm Marcus, an alcoholic, and it's hi, it's really good to be here. I came to this meeting, oh gosh, when Carl Fisher gave a talk, and somebody from this group popped into our Brooklyn. I'm a member of Brooklyn Sober Agnostics, and so advertised, and I remember putting this in my schedule because I thought it was such a incredible opportunity. And both of these shares just really stopped me in my tracks. I really got a lot out of what I was hearing, and I chuckled at one point because I mean, I've been in and out of AA since 1989, and yeah, John from Cottonwood, and you know, I was forced to go to old time AA, and I went to LGBT meetings. Those were kind of like on the forefront, like it was fairly avant-garde to have an LGBT meeting, but they were still incredibly traditional, and you really had to have a higher power. I'm also in the medical profession, so there's caduceus meetings, and I find those also to be pretty traditional. And I really got sober, kind of, you know, like I really figured things out in secular AA, and I moved to New York, and I started going to the physical meetings, I don't know, 12, 15 years ago. And COVID, you know, one of the things that has happened with COVID is just this explosion of secularism in AA, and it's really, really beautiful. And I just feel like it's blossomed, and it's really here to stay. And as the two speakers were speaking, they were just singing the praises of secular AA, and it almost felt evangelical to me because I feel that inspired. I really thought for the longest time that I wasn't gonna be able to get sober because of the sort of whole God thing and higher power thing. And then I sometimes like to do things in my own way, and I've really gotten a lot of support in how to put together recovery in secular AA. So I just wanted to say that and thank both of the speakers. I really got a lot out of what you all had to say.
Thanks very much, Marcus. Appreciate that. Lori, come on in.
Thanks. I'm Lori, grateful alcoholic, and I don't usually speak at these big things either. It's just too big, but and there's always so many people to share. Wow, I've just been totally blown away by this whole conference and all the speakers. I've learned so much about it. Came in here not knowing what phenomenology is, and I have a better idea. But what I really took away from Yuichi was that applying some successes to myself, showing up for meditation when I don't want to, and making that, and now it's become a practice that has really, I find, has just rewired me and just continues to have benefit even when it feels, I still feel awful afterwards. And just showing up for other parts of my life. That's a big takeaway for me, especially writing, which has been a real struggle. So, and Harry's share, I'm personally interested in neurodiversity because my son is high functioning autistic and OCD, and my daughter has ADD. And I think that I'm probably undiagnosed ADD, and this is really the first connection where I connected a while ago that my anxiety, undiagnosed anxiety, probably led me to drink and drug early. I started when I was 14 too, but I never really connected that it was that. Well, it was that never feeling like I fit in, and the fact that when I got to AA, I felt like I did have my tribe, even more than my family, which was my makeshift tribe that had my back, but not like AA and the fellowship and the community and the program. So Zanner, thanks so much for sharing yourself. So transparently and so honestly. I've been really touched and I'm really inspired to radically accept myself, and embrace things that I wouldn't necessarily embrace. But I've had with COVID, the pandemic, I've had struggles with depression, anxiety that I've never had in all of my sobriety, and really been a challenge. So thank you so much for sharing yourself. I so appreciate it. And everyone, thank you so much. Thanks for my sobriety.
Thanks, Lori. Appreciate that. Judy, come on in.
Hi, thank you. My name is Judy. I'm a recovering alcoholic. And I can just ditto everybody else, especially Lori. My hand went up before Lori, but you said everything I might have wanted to say about how great all of the speakers were for me personally. And just quickly, I kind of synthesized each one. Zanner, I felt, was saying what we have on the back of our coin when we get our yearly chip, and it says, "To thine own self be true." And I've always had an individualized recovery. I've never marched in step. And it's so important to find how this applies to me. And I guess that's how Yuichi started, which was about how does it feel in your body? How does it carry in your person? And I really heard that. And thank you. I wrote a book that was first my PhD dissertation. So, and I was very lucky that it was the right zeitgeist and it went really well, the book. So that was cool. But you gave me a lot about, just showing up to the writing. I won't call it writer's block, but I'm just having such a hard time desensitizing from all the incoming that's happening in my life to just give that time. And you reminded me that in Arts Anonymous, they say, have alive at 5 alive. Just give it 5 minutes every morning or every day, and you can get started and be carried away. So I'm making a commitment to you. I'm going to give a 5 alive tomorrow. Tomorrow, notice, not today. I'm too booked. But And then I just want to propose something that Harry's talk gave to me. And that was about, this idea we always hear, oh, we're just super sensitive, we alcoholics, and when I was being raised, my family said, you're just too sensitive, but now I love alcoholics and I love working with all of us and each other because, yeah, we are too sensitive. We live in a very violent society that promotes conformity, and there's some still small voice within that gets sensitized to and that's all been pathologized and diagnosed instead of celebrated. And I'd love to hear any of you speakers comment on that idea about our sensitivity being a gift rather than a curse, and perhaps we're the miner's canaries alerting this planet to we're kind of not living well. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Judy. Appreciate that. Yuichi or Harry, do you want to respond to that question or the request? I know for me, like, my vulnerability has become one of my greatest strengths. Before I came here, it was my biggest weakness, and now it's become one of my greatest strengths. And that's the same with my sensitivity. Absolutely. Yeah. And Kenji, come on in.
Hi, everybody. Kenji, addict, alcoholic. Wow, what a powerhouse meeting it's been today. Thank you all. When Yuichi was speaking about phenomenology, as best I could understand what you were talking about, Yuichi, it brought to mind a long time ago. I remember telling Merle E., who was one of the most senior, most longtime members of the We Agnostics group in Hollywood back in the mid-1980s, why I couldn't do an inventory the way the big book laid out because it was too simplistic. And he just put up his hand and stopped me and said, in AA, we don't debate theory, we share our experience. And so I suppose he was a phenomenologist. I guess we're all phenomenologists. He said, and he went on to say, you're looking for information and experience inside your head that's not there. What we do is we try it and then we say how, what we did and how it worked out as best we understand it. And that turned out to be great advice. And Zanner, I was so moved by your story and inspired. And what really struck me is I suddenly was just overcome with gratitude that we tell each other our stories, because I don't think I've ever heard your stories. Because I don't know about other people, but I tend to make this simplistic assumption that who you are now is who you've always been. And I tend to not appreciate the miracle that we made it here and we changed in the ways that we did. I mean, that this thing worked on us or with us, we worked it, or however that happens, to get us from there to here. And until I hear your story, until you hear my story, and one final thought, which is last night I went to that meeting in Virginia. I forget what it's called, the hybrid meeting, and it was great. I loved it. The speaker was wonderful. But what kind of surprised me, so I haven't been to any in-person and almost no hybrid meetings in a long time. Well, yeah. And what struck me is what an odd change it was to hear laughter in the room responding to what people were saying. And we don't have that at all on Zoom. I don't think it's a lack of empathy or humor. I think it's that for this to work, we're all muted, and we have the little emoticons we can throw up. But I sense during your share a lot of vocalization of love and support. And even though I couldn't hear it with my ear, it's great to be here today. Thanks.
Thanks, Kenji. Appreciate that. Mike, come on in.
Thank you, Zanner. I'm Mike Glazer, alcoholic, addict, and whatnot. And what a phenomenon! I think I was right. One of the finest in Q4 2022, top notch. Everyone knocked it out of the park. Yuichi, phenomenology. It was phenomenal. And yeah, I know. Okay. But a couple things that you said I wanted to, that hit me, and I know we've talked a little bit about phenomenology before, and I love, and it's great how Kenji just tied it in with experience. So I've been doing this thing lately, the last several years, really last couple years, I guess, mainly about not rejecting, but just sort of, I guess, not accepting, external authority. And so meditation has become, like others have said, such a large part of my program. I've been doing this a lot of years too. And it's interesting what the focus is. Initially, of course, it was a lot of meetings. It was inculcation of the program, the dogma, the Kool-Aid, and all that good stuff, which I needed. And then, like I faked it till I made it, or maked it, and then I maked it until I braked it, and then I had to find something else, and all the tools were there, and it was just up to me to put it together, like Zanner said, work my own recovery, and so experiencing the now in a meditative moment, whether it's sitting or washing dishes or doing whatever. Yeah, I love it. And Harry, about the NeuroDivergence stuff, I agree. It is a gift. And, I know that, and I popped in the chat there, the NeuroDivergence meeting in about 15 minutes from now will be starting as well. It's every Sunday. So if you're curious, show up. It's great stuff. Read from a couple of very good books by Devin Price and Gabor Mate. The last thing I'll say is on Zanner's piece. It's I've always talked about how much I've had to change in this program, and of course we talk about how like nothing needs to change, and I'm like, okay, I'm warming up. I think that they can both exist at the same time. I'm gonna figure this fucker out. I will, trust me. Last thing was what I guess to I think it was Judy's point. This is just my 2 cents. Is that as it was described? I think you kind of described it. There's this great book that I read recently called Why We Sleep, and it talks about how there's night owls and there's early birds, and how when we were on the savannah and the plains and all that kind of thing, we needed the shift workers. And so I do, it makes sense to me that it's an evolutionary thing, that yes, there are canaries in the coal mine of the planet, society, culture, whatever, and that we need all the different wirings so that the experience can be had and can be shared. And the last thing I'll tie this in with is the wonderful book, The Spirituality of Imperfection, Ernie Kurtz. It's about telling stories, and that's what we do here. And so stories and myth is really cool, as long as we don't fucking really believe it, but just sort of take it as we need it. And that's what I love to do. So I'm okay with being a human today, and that is it from me. Thanks,
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Appreciate it. Chantel, come on in.
Yeah. My name is Chantal. I'm an alcoholic and an addict in recovery. And I really took a lot out of the three chairs. Zanner, I've heard your story and I identify a lot with what you went through. And it's wonderful to have you as a friend and being able to actually understand. When people tell the stories, it makes me feel good because then I can open up, and I can identify. But all of you had a message for me, whether it's breathing, or doing things just one word at a time, because I'm a professor and I wrote my PhD one word at a time, despite the fact that I was actually traumatized, like you were, Zanner. So going slow is really important for me because I can be a very, very fast thinker and I can be a very fast reactor. And I react to situation. So for me, every time that there is a stimulus coming, from outside, from the environment, what I need to do is just take a pause, really take a break, not take a Kit Kat, just take a break, right? And just count to 10, So that's all I have to say. I'm quite tired. I'm a different time zone here in Greece. So I'm ready to fall asleep. And that's the reason why I'm not speaking very clearly. But thank you all. It was very, very enjoyable listening to the three of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chantal. Appreciate that.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate everything everybody has said, and we're a little over time, but it's between friends. I want to thank the panelists. Wow, great job. And I also want to thank Kat, who had to leave, but she watches the room and the chat and all of that stuff. And we will be presenting our next Varieties of Secular Sobriety Experience, not this coming month. We're going to jump until November because next month, the last Sunday, is part of the International Conference of Secular, Secular AA. If you have any feedback or ideas for future workshops, please feel free to let us know. We really always appreciate the input. I want to say one thing. The biggest response I've had to this whole thing is, I don't know when I started saying it, but it was probably about 35 years ago when people would say, that's an outside issue. And I'd always say, if it affects me, it's an inside issue, motherfucker. And of course, I wasn't real well liked in a lot of meetings either. So I've mellowed a little bit over the last 40 years or so. But I really appreciate so much all the shares and the support. What I think of is all those people that we didn't reach because all the bullshit they heard from people that, that's my judgment. It should be yours too. That people said, and I try not to do that kind of thing. And sometimes I make mistakes. I'm human, but thank you so much for all of your input. And I really appreciate you being here. I want to share the screen with this one little bit here, if I can get this thing to react properly. It's been a little flaky on my end, and maybe that's apropos, I don't know. The opinions expressed here are strictly those of the individual. What you've heard here was spoken in confidence and should be treated as such. If you consider what you've heard, you're bound to gain a better understanding of how to handle your day-to-day problems. These words are for you. Talk to each other. Think things through with other people. Don't worry about them saying you shouldn't think. Let there be no gossip or criticism, but only love, understanding, and companionship. And the way we like to end this meeting, if you care to join us, just unmute and we'll do who's responsible? I
am
responsible
when anyone, anywhere,
She's
out for help. I want the hand of AA to be there. And for that, I am responsible.
Yeehaw.
Very much, everyone.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, everybody, for your service in a great, great meeting.
Basic meeting.
Yeah, Zanner.
Thank you, everyone.